So welcome. It's great to be with all of you. Like I said, please put your name and location into the chat so we can see who we are and who we're studying with here. My name is Rabbi Micah Streifer, and I'm the founder and director of La Asok. Many of you have been studying with La Asok on a regular basis, and I see some new faces also. So welcome to those who are joining us for the first time. Really wonderful to be with all of you. This weekly Tikvah through text program is a way of finding a little hope, a little tikvah in difficult times. Our sources are filled with hopeful ideas, concepts, texts, words that we can take with us. And so I'm really excited today to welcome Rabbi Stacy Petersohn. Rabbi Petersohn is currently located in Sacramento, California. And really excited to welcome her. So I'll invite you to join me in the blessing for study. I'm just going to share my screen. If you'd like to unmute, everybody see my screen there? Mm-hmm. Great. If you'd like to unmute and we can hear each other to say the blessing, feel free to unmute at this time. It's okay to stay muted as well if you'd like. And we'll say together. Baruch atah Adonai Einu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav
Torah.
Amen.
Which means blessed is the Eternal whose mitzvot bring holiness to our lives and who commands us la'asok, to immerse, to engage ourselves in words of Torah. And with that, I'll turn things right over to Stacy Petersohn. Oh, actually, sorry. Let me just say, if you have thoughts, Rabbi Petersohn, we didn't talk about this ahead of time, but hopefully if people have thoughts to share, is it okay if they put them in the chat, if they raise their hands? I'll monitor that, and I can, if you don't see them, I'll point them out to you as well. So folks, if you do have thoughts you want to share, please feel free to share them with us either through the chat or by raising your hand. And welcome to Rabbi Stacy Petersohn.
Thank you, Micah. And to everyone, please, yes, speak up, join. I want this to be a conversation, not just me talking for the next 25 minutes. So the topic I was presented with was, what text do you find hope in? And I'll be honest, the very first thing I thought of was Harry Potter. I grew up with the Harry Potter books, and they represented a lot of my childhood. And so I started to think about what I wanted to share, and a particular moment from the third Harry Potter book came to mind. And to give a little bit of background, in that book, Harry's godfather has been imprisoned for 12 years for a crime he did not commit, and has escaped. And now the scene where the quick little snippet we're going to look at is his grandfather speaking with Harry and his two friends about how he survived being in prison. So it's going to be the first little text we're going to look at together. You can sort of spy a little bit at the bottom where I'm going with this. So Hermione asked, if you don't mind me asking, how did you get out of Azkaban if you didn't use dark magic? Sirius replied, I don't know how I did it. I think the only reason I never lost my mind is that I knew I was innocent. That wasn't a happy thought, so the Dementors couldn't suck it out of me. But it kept me sane, and knowing who I am helped me keep my powers. So this to me is really the ultimate moment of hope in the early books of Harry Potter. And I love the phrase that he talks about knowing that he was innocent and hanging on to that. It's not a happy thought. It is a positive thought, but it's not happy. And so it couldn't be taken away from him. And what I find in this text is that it's about Sirius, Harry's godfather, knowing his truth, knowing what was true about himself, about what had happened 12 years ago, that he was not responsible for the crime he had been convicted of. And so I want us to keep that idea in mind, knowing our truth, knowing who we are as a sense of hope as we make our way into the Jewish text I want to look at, which is not really a short text, but an abridged version of an entire biblical book, we're going to be taking a look at the story of Esther and how Esther finds her truth, and once she does, it changes the entire story, and how we can change what's going on around us just by knowing our truth. Any questions so far? I just want to make sure. When I'm in share screen mode, I can't see everyone, so I just want to check. All right. Well, then let's dive into the book of Esther. So at the very beginning of the book of Esther, actually, we don't even meet Esther until chapter 2. The first chapter is really just a preamble. And we're introduced to Esther as Esther by Abihail. Very quickly, then we get her parents' death, her adoption by Mordecai, being taken to the palace, going to the king, and then eventually being crowned as queen. Esther is completely passive at this point in the story. Everything is happening to her, but she's not making any choices of her own. And it's a little jarring because the story is supposed to be Esther's story, and yet she has no action at all. But all of that will change. So then we're going to now jump forward to Esther chapter 4, very famous moment. And Mordecai delivers his very famous speech of, "Do not imagine that you of all the Jews will escape with your life. On the contrary, if you keep silent in this crisis, relief will come from somewhere else. And who knows, maybe you were put in royal position for just such a moment." Esther's response here is really interesting. She says, "Go and assemble all the Jews who live in Shushan and fast in my behalf. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my maidens will observe the same fast. Then I shall go to the king, though it is contrary to the law, and when I am to perish, I shall perish." So Mordecai went about the city and did just as Esther had commanded him. Here we have Esther taking an active voice now. This is the second time she actually speaks, but this is the first time she's actively doing something and commanding someone to do something else. And what she tells them to do is something very Jewish. She says, "Go fast for 3 days. I'm going to do it too. And that's when I'll go to the king." Why is fasting for 3 days such a Jewish thing to do? Any thoughts? So there's a couple reasons why fasting is such a Jewish thing to do. One, we know fasting is a part of several important days throughout the year, especially Yom Kippur. But here we're told fast for 3 days, and basically night and day. So for 72 hours, you're going to be fasting. There's only one other time I can think of in the entire Hebrew Bible where a group of Jews or Israelites are asked to do the same thing, and that is in preparation to receive the Torah. So Esther is showing here how much she actually embraces her Jewish identity, because she knows this, and she's tapping into that memory of something so important as going up to receive the Torah. And this is on the same level, because this is both spiritually and physically important, because this act that she's about to go do, to go to the king, is going to hopefully save a lot of lives. So she's tapping into that importance of that 3-day fast by mentioning it here as well. And so she is now embracing her Jewish identity, even though we saw a couple of chapters ago, Mordecai actually told her, don't tell anyone you're Jewish. Micah, please.
Yeah, if it's okay, I just jump in with a thought to encourage others to jump in as well. That's really interesting. I had never thought of the 3 days that way, and that this is in many ways an act of Jewish peoplehood, right? Esther, you had just mentioned Esther is hiding her Jewishness, and Esther now invokes the Jewish moment, which is the moment of Sinai, in order, like it's really quite like a high Jewish moment in order to sort of like declare her fidelity to the Jewish people here. It's really extraordinary.
Yeah. And this is creating a moment of hope, not just, well, possibly not even for Esther, but creating a moment of hope for the Jewish people by tapping into that fast. How is Esther, though, feeling about this entire enterprise? I want to see if anyone can find it. So I don't think.
I'm sorry.
Oh, no, please. Yes, please.
It's a fairly fatalistic approach to the problem where she feels she's going to be perishing for violating the law. So it's I don't know how much hope she actually has when she's, offering to do this. My other question is just how Jewish a background she had. I mean, was she hiding her Jewishness, or was she actually an assimilated Jew who wasn't aware of being Jewish? And how could she have known that fasting would be the right solution? And is it the right solution to ask people to fast for 3 days? I mean, I have enough trouble fasting for 1 day just during the day.
Sure.
There's a lot of interesting, things going on here.
Absolutely. No, thank you for all of that. Yeah, this is pretty fatalistic. Most translations translate the word when as if, to give it a little bit more of that like higher positive hope feel. But I actually prefer not to do that. I do prefer to see it as when, because her sense of hope is not necessarily for her individual self, but she's hoping that whatever is going to happen is going to provide benefit for her entire people. And at least she's doing as much as she can. So that's one of the reasons I still find this hopeful, even though it is a little fatalistic on the individual level. The question about Esther's Jewishness, is she a fully assimilated Jew? Is she hiding her Jewishness? That's a big question that we really don't know the full answer to. On the one hand, we can definitely argue she's an assimilated Jew. She has both a Hebrew and Persian name. She tends to go by her Persian. In fact, she goes through by her Persian name the entire book, except for the one instance we do learn her Hebrew name. And yet Mordecai tells her to hide her Jewishness. Don't tell anyone you're a Jew. So there's evidence in both directions of how much she may know in terms of Jewish background. But personally, I like to think that these 3 days that she's tapping into do highlight at least knowing enough of the national narrative to call upon it in people's memories here. As a way of highlighting what she is about to do is very important. So thank you, Bruce. That was wonderful questions. Anybody else before we look at the next step? Because even though Esther here has embraced her Jewishness, this is not the only part of her. So there's actually another piece of herself she has to embrace. All right, well then let's keep looking. So immediately after this, at the beginning of chapter 5, we get one of my favorite moments in the entire book. On the 3rd day, Esther dressed in royalty and stood in the inner court of the king's palace, facing the king's palace while the king was sitting on his throne in the throne room facing the entrance of the palace. And then what we're told next is Esther is shown favor, and therefore she is not killed. Yay. But the Hebrew here is really interesting. It says, I'm going to read the Hebrew really quick, the one phrase, Vatilbash Esther Malchut. That's really strange phrasing to say Esther dressed in royalty. Normally we would expect to see something of a prefix in there. For instance, Vatilbash Esther be Malchut, in royalty. The word in is not actually in there in the Hebrew. So or we might expect to see the word clothing, but it's not there either. So if this isn't about actual clothing, what is she dressing in? I think this is the moment where she fully embraces what it means to be queen, what it means to be royalty. Back at the end of chapter 2, she was crowned queen, but here she's actually embracing it. At the end of chapter 4, we see her embrace her Jewish identity. Here we see her embrace her identity as queen. And in fact, in the next verse, we are told, as soon as the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court, he sees her as queen and not just as his wife. And so this is her moment of embracing the other half of her identity as well. And this is where the story is going to take a huge turn in who Esther is, just by embracing. Yes, Esther is embracing her own power. Exactly. This is what's going on here. And she is going to become a completely different character now. Any thoughts or questions so far? Please speak up. I love it when people jump in and ask questions and participate. Don't be shy. Otherwise, I'll keep going. All right, well, then let's keep going. We're going to jump now to chapter 7. This is the second of the 2 wine feasts that Queen Esther invites the king and Haman to. The king says, whatever you wish, whatever you want, it shall be granted you, even to half of the kingdom. The king has now said this 3 times to Esther. And it's now that he has said this 3 times that she can now tell him what's really going on. So we have Queen Esther replying, if your majesty will do me the favor, and if it pleases your majesty, let my life be granted me as my wish, and my people as my request. For we have been sold, my people and I, to be destroyed, massacred, and exterminated. Had we only been sold as bondmen and bondwomen, I would have kept silent, for the adversary is not worthy of the king's trouble. So Esther does some really interesting things with language here. And the biggest thing is she actually hasn't said she's Jewish yet. That's not how she's relating to the king. She says, let my life be granted me as my wish, my people as my request, my people and I. She repeats those phrases. Had we only been sold, I would have kept silent. She's using this first person plural and singular language to get the king to relate to her, so that when she's telling him what's going on, it's not, oh, the Jews who are this group off to the side, but no, this affects me. I'm your wife. You love me. You've been telling me for days now you would give me even up to half your kingdom. And so this is how she gets the king on her side in this bigger conversation, not by telling her about the injustice being done to the Jewish people, but about the injustice being done to her and her people. And for those of you who can really remember, if we were to go back to chapter 3, when Haman makes his argument, he does something in the opposite direction. He says, those people over there, those foreigners, those people who don't do as we do. So Esther is also completely reversing that language back in chapter 3. Anything else? No. Thank you, Micah, for booing him. Has anyone noticed this before, that she doesn't actually out herself as a Jew right away? Or is this new for some people to actually see? I'm curious. Yeah, this is one of those stories we feel like we know so often, and we often tell the truncated version, and we condense certain moments together, that we don't even realize some of these gems exist until we take a look at the text much more closely. Yeah, she's could be a little bit of dramatic irony, absolutely dramatic irony, and doesn't want to be othered by the king. Yeah, she wants him on her side, and that's why she waited. We are now seeing Esther not as the quiet girl who things happen to. We are seeing Esther as the queen who is as the Jewish queen who is a strategist, who is taking everything in her own hands and being her own person. And we know how this part of the story goes. The king is upset. He wants to know who is doing this. This is where Haman's plot is revealed, and goes on and on and on. The great battle happens, and then we get to the very end, where Esther and Mordecai are instituting the holiday of Purim. And so we are then told, then Queen Esther, daughter of Abihail, wrote this second letter of Purim for the purpose of confirming with full authority the aforementioned one of Mordecai the Jew. And then, so they're instituting this new holiday. Down at verse 31, these days of Purim shall be observed at their proper time as Mordecai the Jew, and now Queen Esther has obligated them to do. And Esther's ordinance validating these observances of Purim was recorded in a scroll. So this is chapter 9. It's not the very end of Esther, but it's pretty close to the end. And this is the first time we see Esther fully identified with who she is on both ends. She is identified as Queen Esther. She's also identified as Esther, daughter of Abihail. So this is her full personhood here. This is her full truth. She is both queen and a Jew. And that is who she is presented to us as at the end of her story. And we're even told at the very end of the story, Esther's ordinance was validated and put into a scroll. Could it possibly be the scroll we're reading from? Esther and Mordecai are the only two people to have ever created a Jewish holiday at this point, a day of celebration. And it is one that we still celebrate today, and we still read her story more than 2,000 years later. And it really is, we see here at the end that she has embraced who she is. That embrace is what allows her to tap into who she is, what her truth is, and how she can make a difference in the world. And I think that's something all of us can take away from her story, is that rather than trying to fight the different parts of us that are maybe sometimes don't seem like they mesh together, but when we take a look at our whole self and accept our whole truth, then we can make the kind of difference we want to see. And that is where we can find hope, by embracing who we fully are. Any last questions? I see we've got a couple minutes left, so I want to make sure there's any questions, comments.
I see Bob's hand up.
Please.
Well, I have a question, and I am sorry to bring this up because it changes the tenor of the whole thing, but we have to face the whole Megillah and not just the parts that you covered here. And since Purim came this year, right in the middle of the battles that are going on in Gaza, I did pay attention to the fact that both because an edict of the king could not be canceled, therefore he had to issue an additional edict permitting the Jews to fight. And in this fight, it actually specifies that 75,000 Persians were killed. That's an interesting figure, given the figures that are floating around these days. So I don't know. It's a different aspect to the story. I don't know if you want to say anything about that.
There is a whole lot we could say about that. Unfortunately, we do not have the time, and that is a whole other lesson, really digging deep into all of that, because there's a lot to unpack there. But thank you for bringing it up. That is also a part of this story and should not be too overlooked. Micah.
Yeah, I just really briefly, it occurs to me that in some ways, coming to the text as our whole selves, which is the point that you're making, involves noticing the parts that make us uncomfortable or that are against our values. And so in some ways, that's what La Soak is, right? It's a place where we can read the text and talk about the texts as our whole selves as progressive Jews. And so well, you're right. We don't have time to go into the question Bob raised because that's a whole hour discussion in of itself. But the very fact that we're raising it, I think, is an important note, or sort of like an important sign that we are coming to the text as our whole selves.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Bruce, you have a hand up.
Oh, I just wanted to thank you for bringing together the connection between Sirius Black and Esther. I thought that was fabulous. And I've been thinking about it in terms of just what the commonality is, and the idea of Sirius surviving and finding hope in the knowledge that he was innocent struck me as really very something we haven't really mentioned about Esther, but I think it's there as a strong theme of her knowledge of herself and her people as being innocent, falsely accused. So anyway, Mazel Kol HaKavod, very, very beautiful.
Thank you. I will add that next time. That actually is a really great piece. I didn't even think about that. So thank you, Bruce.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Well, thank you, everyone.
Let me just say thank you to Rabbi Stacy Petersohn for this wonderful teaching, a new way of looking at Esther. I love the idea of Esther coming to be as her whole self by the end of the story, and that all of us really are working toward coming into our whole selves. So thanks again to Rabbi Stacy Petersohn. Thank you to everybody for participating, and I look forward to seeing you next week. Take care, everyone.
Thank you very much. Take care.